outset, impress upon your minds that the city is entitled to exactly the same fair treatment in this court as are individuals or corporations. I have the shadow of a suspicion that sometimes jurors forget that. I do not want you to do it in this case. Render your verdict for or against the city just the same as if it were John Smith or any other individual who was a defendant. The plaintiff brings this suit alleging and purporting to prove by the proof she has presented here that she was injured through the negligence of the city in that the city did not exercise reasonable care to keep the sidewalk in a reasonably safe condition for the use of pedestrians. It is the duty of the city to use reasonable care to keep the sidewalks and the highways in a reasonably safe condition for the use of the public. But there we must consider what the word reasonable means. The law does not expect impossibilities, nor is it unreasonable in its requirements. It requires only reasonable care, and what is or is not reasonable care depends upon all the circumstances surrounding the situation, just as it does in every other case where the question of reasonable care arises. Now, this accident is alleged to have happened upon the sidewalk of 66th Street, as you know from the testimony. That is quite a congested part of the city. You must consider all the circumstances and determine what is reasonable, what is reasonably to be expected from the city under all the circumstances surrounding it. Just bear in mind that the city is dealing with sidewalks that lie out of doors, subject to all sorts of weather conditions, rains, snowstorms, blizzards, and whatnot, and the law being reasonable does not require the city to keep the sidewalks clear from snow, for example, during a blizzard. If it rains during the night and starts to freeze before morning, the entire city, as to its sidewalks, is covered with a smooth coat of ice. Now, it would be unreasonable to expect the city in the short time available under the circumstances to remove all that ice from the 3,000 or 4,000 miles of sidewalk that the city is charged with the care of. The law is reasonable. We must consider always in passing upon these snow and ice cases upon the sidewalk, and we must keep in mind the weather conditions. You have the testimony from the Weather Bureau as to what the weather conditions had been just prior to this accident. You have the testimony of the plaintiff of conditions as she found them. Now, the question is, under all those circumstances, was the city negligent? That is the first question that is presented. It is required to exercise reasonable care to keep the sidewalks reasonably safe under all the circumstances that exist. Of course, bear this in mind. We are dealing with a sidewalk. If a sidewalk gets slippery, it is not necessary, if there is an accumulation of ice, that the city should remove the ice in order to make it safe for pedestrians. It is sufficient to scatter sawdust or sand or ashes to cover the surface of the ice, and as you and I know, you can walk over that just as safely as you can the bare sidewalk. Of course, I have spoken of the 3,000 or 4,000 miles of sidewalk. Bear that in mind, and the Herculean job of taking care of them and keeping them safe for pedestrians. But remember that the city has an army of employees whose duty it is to see that the sidewalks and the highways are reasonably safe, and if not, to report them. And under the law, upon due notice, it is primarily the duty of the householder to keep his sidewalk clear. But as to the public looks to the city. It is the duty of the city to do it themselves or see that the householder does it. And there are policemen upon every beat. The householder is obliged to use reasonable care to take care of pedestrians. If the snow cannot be removed, he is to take other means to render it safe, and the policemen are there to see that they do that. If they don't do it, they are liable under the law. Those are some of the circumstances that should be kept in mind. Of course, we must find where in all human probability the truth lies. What actually were the conditions there? There is considerable conflict in the testimony. We have the testimony from the Weather Bureau as to what weather conditions prevailed throughout the city. We have witnesses here who describe what the condition of the sidewalk was. According to the plaintiff, there had been ice upon the sidewalk there for some little time.